So we're saying over here, the difference between the subservience to the mitzvah versus the subservience to the Balarotz and the master of the will, it results in the performance. And he explains, the oz hagam shesibes kiyumam hugam ke mipnei shekachu rotzen elyon baruch hu. He says, then, even though the commitment is because this is God's will, nevertheless, had a year boy havdel, there will be a difference bein kiyum hamishpotim lekiyum achukim, in the fulfillment of laws in comparison to the fulfillment of statutes. The bekiyum hamishpotim, when you fulfill the laws, had a yargish einig yeser mikiyum achukim, you will feel more pleasure in the rational laws versus the statutes which are irrational. That's if your commitment is to the what? To the mitzvah, to the will. Mashenkin, conversely, b'mi shemekayem es ha-mitzvahs mipnei sibes ha-kabbalah soil ha-kloli, someone who fulfills the mitzvah because he's committed to the overall master, which we call Kabbalah soil ha-kloli, the overall Kabbalah soil. And he says in the parentheses, Shehu inyan hakdamas nasel nishma. This is the idea of the prefacing nasel nishma. So he's given away now the answer. What makes us have the Kabbalah soil? It's the prefacing of nasel nishma. That's the virtue of hakdamas nasel nishma. It means my commitment is not to the what, my commitment is to the who. And who is the who? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Baal HaRotzai. Oz harigam b'kiyum achukim. So then, even when you do statutes, irrational mitzvahs, like shatnez and all the other things, yargish einig niflam, you will feel a great pleasure, a wondrous pleasure. And this is the answer. Why is it that sometimes we say, I have no joy in doing the mitzvah? The mitzvah to me is a pain. I'm doing it because I have Kabbalah soil, but I really don't like doing it. And you know what the answer is? Right here is the answer. We just learned the answer. Because your commitment to begin with is not to the Bala Rotzen, it's to the Rotzen. And if it's the Rotzen, some things I don't want to do, so I don't like it. Think of it in a relationship. If you're committed to each other because of the what, there are going to be times when you're not happy with each other because the what doesn't excite you or you're against the what. But if you're committed to the who meaning the institution of marriage, it's only peace and harmony and good because the institution is holy. You're committed to the overall idea. The details have to be worked out. So the Rebbe says here, you want to have a oinig nifla. Look at the words, oinig nifla, a wondrous pleasure, like we say in Yiddish, a geschmack in the mitzvah. A geschmack in a mitzvah doesn't come from bottom up, mitzvah to you. It comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to you. If you're committed to Hashem, then I'm yours. Whatever you want, Master. You want me to stay home? I have the same thing. You know, we have that, the famous difference Chasidus brings, Yonason, you remember, right, between Rabbi Akiva and Avraham Avinu. The Gemara says in Brachas, Rabbi Akiva said, Mosai Ovel Yodi, when will I have a chance to do the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, right? And when the Romans raped him and killed him and all that, he fulfilled the mitzvah of Mesiras Nefesh. Wow. Says Chasidus, as high as that is, as great as that is, it doesn't compare to Avram's Mesiras Nefesh. What was Avram's Mesiras Nefesh? You want me to die for you, Hashem? I'm right there. But you want me to live for you? I will have the same pleasure in living for you as I have in dying for you. Rabbi Akiva had what we call a mavukish, because it says Kol Yomai. You look into the Gemara, Kol Yomai. All my days I was seeking Mesiras Nefesh. That means he had an agenda. A holy agenda, but it was still an agenda. Avram Avinu had no agenda. Avram Avinu says, I'm yours. I'm yours. So this is a good example to explain the difference between the subservience to the mitzvah versus the subservience to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it doesn't, by the way, it doesn't, Kiva was a tzaddik and all that, but still, there are levels. So do you do it because the mitzvah turns you on, or do you do it because God turns you on? Irrelevant to what the mitzvah is. And that's what the Rebbe says here. And this, I think, for me, this really answers this issue. Why is it certain mitzvahs are just boring? The answer is because you haven't yet reached the point where you're totally committed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But I'm doing the mitzvah. Doing the mitzvah half-baked is doing the mitzvah, but it's half-baked. Because you're not committing to him. You're committing, in a sense, to yourself. And you see in the mitzvah, you see Baruch in the mitzvah yourself. And therefore you do the mitzvah. Let's say, I want to have a nice little nesser because listen, I'm going to come to shul, or my kids should see. I like the mitzvah. I'm saying not even in a grub way, in a yesh way, but I'm saying the mitzvah is what prompts your involvement, your interest, your commitment. If that's the case, there's a difference between mishpatim, the amount of pleasure you get in doing mishpatim. This I understand. Giving tzedakah, I understand. Not to steal, I understand. In those mitzvahs, I have full commitment because they speak to me. But in the mitzvahs that don't speak to me, nah. But I do them because I'm a frum Jew. I'm committed to Hashem. That's the attitude and result. If the kiyum is only to the Ratzon Hashem, then comes the kiyum to the Bala Ratzon. It's not about the particular mitzvahs. Moshe, this is such an important point to think about Shavuos, where Hashem gives us the Torah. We're getting the Torah in 3-4 days. In Yirtzeh Hashem, 4 days in Yirtzeh Hashem. And we have to ask ourselves, what is our commitment to Torah? And that's why there were Yidden. Reb Mendel, tell the story of Mendel Futterfass. It was 100+ degree, like you had a heat wave last week. And Kfar Chabad at the time, the roof was flat, maybe it still is. And it was boiling hot. So no one came to the afternoon Seder, 3:30. One bacher walks in, and he sees the Mendel sitting there with his casquette that he wore, and his kapot, his frock, and it's like scorching. So he goes over, he says, Mendel, if you maybe go onto the porch, they had a marpeset over there, it's a little cooler, a little. Maybe more Bochrim will want to come, because now the whole Beis Medrash is empty. So Mendel said, absolutely not. What am I going to show them? That because it's boiling, and it is boiling, all of a sudden, you lax up, you easy up, and that's not what I want to teach my Bochrim. I want to teach them by fire and by cold and whatever the case is. Again, put it in perspective. I'm not saying they should have had air conditioning, but the attitude that, that's a mitzvah. You're committed to the mitzvah of learning, but as soon as it gets a little tough, you run the other way. The same was here in Brooklyn. The Rebbe didn't let his Chasidim, He spoke about not leaving the neighborhood when the neighborhood went south, in the 60s. And everyone ran like mice. All my neighbors here. And their Rebbe, God bless him, they all ran out. Who stayed in Crown Heights? Only the Lubavitchers, the nuts, the cuckoos. And why? They would have also ran away. Because the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, don't leave. And by the way, the Satmar Rebbe said the same thing in Williamsburg, because they also had issues there. And he said, don't leave. And Moshe Feinstein came in 68 or 66, one of those years, and he spoke. He was the Poisek Ador. He said, it's forbidden to leave the neighborhood. But meanwhile, no one listened to him, except the Lubavitchers. the commitment is not to the Ratzon. The commitment is to the Baal HaRatzon. In this case, the Rebbe being a conduit for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, whatever. But why didn't the other Hasidim have the same belief in their conduit? Again, these are sensitive things and not things, for public, but you know what I'm saying. It's just a mindset, how trying to break it down, the difference between the commitment and subservience. So sure, it's Shavuos, and we're happy, and the Matan Torah, Kabbalah Torah, but then you got to sit and think a little bit. You have time. What does it mean to myself, my family? What message do I want to bring to them? And again, you know how it is every generation. You start here and it goes here. You start here, it goes here. So you might as well start on top. It'll fall a little bit. You know what I'm saying? It'll fall a little bit. But there's still a yachas. There's a comparison. But if you start low, it falls below the line. And when it falls below the line, you get a lot of heartache, which we don't need. Let's continue, or we have another few minutes. And now he says, now here he says, it's a very short, brief few words, but there's a lot lying in this line. He says, so too, in the fulfillment of law, mishpatim, hare ha'oinig hu nifla yoser. Shmuel, why did it say nifla yoser? First of all, what is he saying? He says,
I'm doing it because it's normal for everybody to do them. But no, if I'm doing them because, again, like you said, this is what Hashem wants, so we get even a bigger oinig because I'm going against the what's intuitive.
That's right. That's right. That's the point. Let me just elaborate for a minute. Mishpatim laws are natural. We understand civil law, right? Moshe Myers, right? We understand. You don't need to have a Torah to tell you not to murder, not to steal, and to give tzedakah, to help someone. So you would think that when you do mishpatim, when you do them, and you're committed to the mishpatim, if you do them because you're committed to God's will, not to the master, but you do it because of the will, you have pleasure. The Rebbe says, but if you're coming from the perspective that you're doing mishpatim because this is the will of the master, and you're committing this to the master, you'll have even more pleasure in doing civil law. Civil law will leave its civility and its rationality and be transformed by transcendence God. So your giving of tzedakah is no longer just because I have mercy on the person. Your giving of tzedakah is because Hashem wants you at this moment to give tzedakah. And the same idea with not to steal and all the other prohibitions. It's not because it's just civil. It's godly. And the sensation of something being godly, that's why look at the language he uses, hu einig nifla. When can you say it's a wondrous pleasure? Like I said before in Yiddish, it's a geschmack. When is it really geschmack? When is it really tasteful and delightful and pleasurable? When it's God's pleasure. When it's your pleasure on the most refined, even in the most refined way, at the end of the day, it's you. And if it's you, there are differences how it plays itself out. For example, Moshe always asked you for example. If in your mind, and this is something that we grapple with, if in your mind what you're doing is not inappropriate, you find loopholes how to do it. Because it's rational, so you rationalize. And you say, but maybe not in this case, right? You play that game. That all comes if your commitment is only to the Ratzon Hashem. If your commitment is to the Baal HaRatzon, it's not up to you. No one's asking you. Hashem is your master, and Hashem says this is the way it is. Zehu. Now, if halacha and das Torah and finds a kosher legal loophole and it's really acceptable by Rabbonim, then it's again the will of Hashem. You can go beyond. You can do Hider mitzvah, lifnim meshuras hadin. Whoever has their mic on, take it off, please. You can go lifnim meshuras hadin and go beyond, but that's lifnim meshuras hadin. In din, if halacha supports it, That also is an answer to Yoni's question of last week. You can't put it all into one box. It doesn't work that way. Like Shmuel said before the shir, he was talking to Yoni about it. You can't put it all into one box. It has to be looked at. Like I've told you, who's a good rabbi? Who's a good rav? Someone who finds a heter that's really solid in halacha. To say everything's forbidden is easy. But to find a heter that's really a Torah or valued heter, that's a specialty. That's a specialty. That's not something that, and that's why, for example, that's right. That's why there were serious shilas that the Rebbe and Rabbi Zalman Shimon Dvorkin, who was the main Rav of Lubavitch for years in Kranites, they sent heavy shilas to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. He took upon himself, his shoulders, to make these rulings. That whatever, I don't know why, how. I mean, we know why, how, because he was such a genius of halacha and a posek. But nevertheless, that's what he took upon himself. And Klal Yisrael needs such a person, but it takes an expert like Rav Moshe and a Yireh Shamayim and a humble person of that stature to make such a ruling. The average Rav wouldn't, and because they were scared. I mean, you're talking about another. One second. A story, another story.
Rabbi was like that.
Once, Rabbi Linowitz, yeah, Oliver Sholem. There was this question. It was a real serious question about adoption, and it was actually a Lubavitcher couple, either in the 60s, 70s, I don't know. They wanted to adopt. And halachically, there's some serious shilas. Should it be a Jewish child or a Goy? Which is better? Because of Yichud, a Goyish child is better, but there are other issues. It's a complicated shilah. And the Rebbe, would always say, go to a Rav. The Rebbe was a Rebbe. He didn't paskin, although, we heard many things of psak over the years at Fabrengens, but he would always send you to a Rav. And for whatever reason, Rav Zalman Shimon Dvorkin, the Chabad Rav, didn't want to make a ruling, so he sent them to Rabbi Soloveitchik. He sent a Lubavitcher couple to Rabbi Soloveitchik of Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan, who, at the time, the world perceived him as the left wing, Mizrahi. And I was told this by Rabbi Charlop, who was a Rebbe, or a Yeshiva, or Maggid Shir at Yeshiva University, and very close to Rabbi Soloveitchik. He told me the story. So he said that the Lubavitcher couple needed someone to present their case to Rabbi Soloveitchik. So Rabbi Soloveitchik in the afternoon, between breaks and giving the shir, or after the shir, Rabbonim would come from all over. The young Israel Rabbonim would come to speak to him. Because he came once a week from Boston to Manhattan, to New York, to the yeshiva. Anyway, so Charlop was there, and he went into to Rabbi Soloveitchik, and he says that this couple, a Lubavitcher couple, they don't have children, they want to adopt this situation. They want to ask the Rav if the Rav can find a legitimate heter. Rabbi Soloveitchik basically said to him, I'm sorry. First of all, why they're coming to me? They're Lubavitchers. They have their Rabban. He said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe suggested to go to the Rav there. The Rav said, come to you. So he told them to come back in 3 months. He wants to think about it. 3 months go by. He says, come back in 3 more months. At the end of 6 months or so, and the pressure was for him to give up psak, he says, look, I really am uncomfortable giving up psak. This shows that he was a big Yireh Shamayim. And he says, Im Yitz Hashem, come back in 6 months, and then I'll give you a psak. And the 6 months went by, she became pregnant. And then he ruled that it was allowed, and the rest is history. So Rabbi Charlop was telling me that Rabbi Soloveitchik was like a tzaddik, that he gave a bracha and it was mekuyim. But all I'm saying is, look at the meticulousness. Here they call him a left-wing modern Orthodox rabbi and leader, you know what I'm saying? And look how he was so ambivalent and so hesitant to give the psak, to give the heter. Because giving a heter for a real Rav and a real Talmud Chacham is very serious business. Yes, Moshe Myers. Yes, Moshe.
Yeah, I'm sorry I have to go to a point, but I wanted to ask you the point you made before about, are you saying, do I understand correctly, that, for instance, if you're doing a mitzvah, let's say tzedakah, the higher level is, I'm not doing it because it's the right thing to do, it's societal, the community says we should give, it's because Hashem says we're supposed to give tzedakah.
That's
and
right.
So having that, being cognizant of that, you're saying it's going to be a higher level.
Yes. In other words, so then, if you don't have the money to give, you'll do tzedakah with your mind. You'll do tzedakah with your heart. You'll do tzedakah with your bond because you're committed to Hashem's will, which is tzedakah.
Right. Okay.
Whereas if you don't have the funds, okay, I'm excused. Okay, guys, have a great day. We'll see everyone tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem.
Right.
Bye bye.
Amen.
Take care.